back to Fabric Creations. I'm Tiffany, and today I wanted to take a few minutes and go over some questions that I get asked quite often about quilt backing. So I'm just going to call this the whys and hows of quilt backing. First of all, the whys. People ask, why do long arm machines require extra backing fabric? Why should you press the fabric? And the third question is why vertical seams can be necessary, but are horizontal seams better? So then we have the hows. How to measure your quilt top before you go to the store and purchase the backing. I'm going to show you that. And then how to figure the yardage for the backing. You know, a lot of times we want to use 108-inch fabric, and it works out great for most quilts, but occasionally you find one that's bigger than 108. So how to piece your backing, and sometimes you might even find something in a 44-inch width that you want to use and you don't know how to measure for it. So that's some questions that I'm going to answer in today's video. So first of all, I'm going to take you to the long arm machine and show you why you need extra fabric around all four edges of your quilt top. I'm at the long arm machine, and I want you to notice that this is the perfect width of backing fabric that you need to supply with your quilt top, because look how nicely and flat this lays. So we need to have plenty of room when we move our machine up and down to base the quilt with our clamps out of the way. Now if we clamped like within an inch or so of the quilt top, the head of this machine is going to bump that clamp just like that every time we move by. It's going to bump, and that's going to cause this quilt top to jump and move out of place, and it's not going to lay as flat and nice as it would if we were able to pull our clamps out of the way and let it lay nice and flat. So that's the reason you need extra backing fabric all the way around the edges of your quilt top. Now that we know why long arm machines require extra backing fabric, let's go to the next question. Why should you press the fabric? Now, a lot of times when the fabric is rolled onto a bolt, it will have some pretty definite creases here along the folds, and that's something that needs to be pressed out, because if not, that crease might cause a problem when the long arm machine goes back and forth over it. So it's just a good idea to press those creases out. Now, the normal creases from just being folded up with your quilt top after it's been pressed initially, those creases usually pull right out when it's stretched on the long arm machine. So don't worry about it. If you have pressed it one time and you feel like, oh, it's going to be wrinkled up for a while before we get it on there, those wrinkles usually fall right out. And a lot of times you'll get a backing that maybe a dark color, red or black or something, that has a lot of dye in it and it's real stiff. Sometimes those are best pre-washed and pre-pressed before you bring them, because they just lay better, they're much softer, and those creases fall out a lot easier if you'll do that, especially if it has a lot of dye in it. Okay, so that's why you need to press your fabric. And then another question I get is about the seams. Should we do vertical seams or should we do horizontal? And occasionally you'll need a vertical seam, just because maybe the amount of fabric that you bought, it's only going to fit, or it'll fit better if you do a vertical seam down the middle. Or sometimes you have a directional fabric that the print needs to go a certain direction, and that would be a reason to do a vertical seam. But my preference for long arming is horizontal seams, just because when you roll that horizontal seam onto the rollers, it lays so much flatter. And a lot of times if you have that seam right down the middle of your quilt vertically, that part of the backing is tight. It's tighter than the edges, so you don't want your edges to be floppy. So that's another reason I prefer the horizontal, because everything lays so nice and smooth when you make horizontal seams. Okay, so that answers all of our why questions. And now we're going to move on to the hows, and how to measure your quilt top is the first thing. So be sure that you use a flexible tape measure. Now this is the same procedure that I teach in my classes when I'm showing the ladies how to measure to put a border on. You never want to lay it down on your cutting mat to measure for a border or to measure for your backing. Always hold it up with a flexible tape measure and run your finger along the edge just like that, and that gives you so much more of a accurate measurement, okay? And measure the length and the width the same way. Okay, now the next thing we need to do is determine what kind of yardage we're looking at for our quilt top or quilt backing. So I have a little mock diagram here of a quilt top that's 90 inches by 100. Okay, so first thing we need to do is add 10 inches to the width and 10 inches to the length. So that's going to give us 100 inches by 110 inches. So that is what we need to purchase for our backing. Now let's say we wanted to use a 44-inch fabric. How in the world would we know how much yardage to buy for 44-inch fabric? It seems a little daunting, but it's really not that hard. Okay, now we do know that when we go and purchase this, we're going to roll this out on the table, and we're going to need 100 inches for one width of this. Okay, and then think in your mind, okay, my quilt is 110 inches long, so how many widths of that am I going to need? How many times am I going to need to roll out 100 inches in order to get this to fit my quilt top? Okay, so one width is 44, two widths is 88, three widths is 135. So our 110 falls in between the 88 and the 135. So we need at least two widths, but not quite a full third width. So you could go ahead and purchase three widths if you don't want to take the time to figure the difference. But if you'll just take a few minutes, it's not that hard. You can figure out how much you actually need for this bottom section. And in this case, on this particular quilt measurement, it's going to save you about a yard of fabric doing it like this. So first of all, we say 110 is what we need, and two widths is going to give us 88 inches. So 110 minus 88 is 22. So we know that this section down here at the bottom needs to be 22 inches. Okay, and we're going to turn our 44-inch this direction, and we need at least one, two, and part of another one for your 44-inch pieces to equal this 100 inches. Okay, so we will buy 22 inches 3 times, which is 66. So when we take our 100 and 166, we get 266 inches. Okay, now I have figured up that 266 inches divided by 36, because 1 yard is 36 inches, that is going to equal 7.39 yards of fabric. So we would just round this up to like 7.5 yards. Okay, and that's going to save you almost a full yard of fabric doing it this method. So as I tell my customers, I don't mind if you text me or call me real quick and say, hey, how much fabric should I buy? I found this backing fabric and I don't have a clue. Just call me or text me and I'll figure it out for you real quick. But you could carry these instructions around with you in your purse if you wanted, and all of us have a little calculator on our phones, so that makes it really easy if you take your, but don't forget to take your quilt top measurement with you when you go to buy your backing fabric. So I hope these tips have helped you, maybe helped you understand a little bit more about how the long arm machine works and how the seams need to be in your backing. Now when you make these seams, be sure and press those, okay? You don't need to press them open. Please press them to one side because that gives it more stability. But be sure and press. And thanks so much for watching our videos, and I hope to see you again soon.